mask in the middle of church. That if I'd have come up with the idea 5 years ago of us all to wear a mask and put the collection plates at the back of the church so we didn't have to pass collection plates, y'all would have run me out of here on the first train that came by. But we do to embrace and to care for one another. The understanding of what it means to be a loving person and care one for another is all more heightened from the fact that we're still in the Easter season. I noticed the cross out front this morning as I came in, the sun kind of radiating off the white cloth that continues to announce to the world the presence of Easter and the resurrected Christ. And so we need that message, even though we may not be able to reach out with in person or reach out via the web to folks, at least when they drive by and stop the intersection just a few minutes, they have to think about, and they're probably like, why does that church still have its cross out for Easter? And we're still there. We're almost to the ascension and almost to the gift of the Spirit, but we're not quite there yet because we're still in the season of Easter when we celebrate the resurrection and the good news of Christ. This passage from John piggybacks right onto that. Part of what we understand and what we hear and what we experience in Easter's message is the idea of this caring and this love, that this abiding presence of Christ that goes on in the world. We light the Paschal candle to remind us during the season of Easter, the light of Christ being brought back into the world, that the power of death is over, that Christ is alive and is with us. And we see that through the light of Christ alive in the world. Today's passage, the part that really stuck to me and spoke out to me was about this abiding presence of God, this abiding of God's love. You know, abiding is something that's one of those constant things. It's not something that's like, yes, we'll do it today, maybe tomorrow, but not the next day. And you know, it's kind of fickle here, there, and yon. It's a constant. It's consistency. It's a depth. It's different than just kind of, yeah, well, we're acquaintances. It's an abiding. So one commentator noted that abide means a relationship of trust, knowledge, love, and unity that exists, particularly in this instance between Christ and God. But I think that means for presence of between humans, between us, this idea of a relationship of trust and knowledge and love and unity. With all the college graduations and the news of graduates from yesterday filling Facebook from hither to yon, it was reminding me a little bit of my time in campus ministry at Appalachian. And I was thinking about this abiding presence. We used to get folks who would kind of come only for a meal every once in a while or something. We'd get people who might stop in for a program once a semester. And one of the times we would do these surveys. You know, I love surveys, and I'm so sick of them. So I remember my last class in seminary, they gave us a survey at the end of it, and I'll never forget. I said, I fill out survey after survey, and nothing seems to ever change. You know, I was bolden. I was on the way out. You know, what were they going to do to me now? Those surveys. But we used to, in campus ministry, we would have people fill out surveys. And oftentimes, at least one or two or 4 or 5 or 10 or 25, and this happens in churches too, they say, well, it's awful cliquish. You're either part of the group or you're not. And it always got me, because I don't know, maybe I was in part of the group. Maybe that's part of what it was. But I also showed up there when I was aggravated, and people listened to me complain. I showed up when I got an A on an exam and was excited. I showed up when I was, just having a normal day. I showed up when I was tired and ill, and they put up with me. And that over time begins to be building, begins to strengthen. And you understand what it means to abide. Oh, there were times we went on mission trips and we would clean out one house. I remember it. I think it was in Charlotte. I'm not really certain. But I do remember this. I had one of those Swiss Army watches. I used to always wear a watch. I don't wear them now. It's on Sunday only. And part of the reason is this very instance. We were cleaning out this house, and we carried a stove out to the dumpster. And so one of the other guys and I reached up to carry that stove and throw it in the dumpster. And when we did, the bottom of that stove got on top of my watch and pulled me up halfway up into the... Finally, I got it off before it pulled me into the dumpster too. But that's one of those stories, and we can still chuckle and remember it, and we build things. That abiding presence, that constancy in a relationship begins to give you stories, both good and bad, but yet at the same time, it's a consistency. It's a relationship. It builds. That's what I think is here. I think if you really get into this text, especially in the light of being in Easter, you understand and you've seen the connection between Jesus and God, His earthly life. I thought about that. The part that I remember mostly from His life in this time of great trial just before His crucifixion was His prayers in the garden. For some of the Scriptures accounts that he sweated blood, which is a very human possibility in times of great stress and turmoil. The body angst. Part of this may show us that just in case you don't think that Jesus is human, this is how human He is, that even His blood became out in His sweat, that He was so full of angst and anxiety and scared. What does He do? He prays to God. Now, theologically, you could get off on a 14-volume set of the interaction of humanity and the interrelationship of the Trinity, which is coming up soon. But that's not what we're here for today. This abiding presence, this desire, this need for God's guidance and God's wisdom and God's presence in the life of Christ, that's where He reached out to. He knew throughout the times of teaching and being around each other this consistency, this interdependence. But He reaches out in a way that's very human, so that we perhaps see that and understand that in our faith and in our life journey. For the days that are really good and we're really excited and we can thank God and praise God, to the challenging times in our lives when we don't know which step we're going to take next. Those are the times that we reach out away and rely on our dependence. The other point of this text that I heard, you probably maybe heard more and even better ideas, but for me, this idea of what it means to love, you've heard me say this before, that love is not just a feeling. It's not some box of chocolates. It's a deeper, ongoing. This commentator suggested that love is to be for another and to act for another, even at the cost of oneself. This selfless love. We see this exemplified and modeled in the life of Christ, this willingness to go to death on the cross, even on the cross, so that His message of love and peace and hope could be shared throughout the world, so that the forgiveness of sins could be offered for all people, so that we could know that we are loved and cared for, so we could also see the fullness of who God is through the power of the resurrection on Easter morning. This life that is not conquered by death, the tenet and strength and power of our faith. We know life is forevermore through the work of Christ. That we're brought into His family. That we're given this opportunity. Love is for us to be for one another and to act for one another, even at cost for ourselves. This is a fullness of what it means to be in the Christian life. We know that. We know about how God calls us to care for one for another. And now, in the midst of our current situation in our world, especially, it's important for us to stay distant, to wear masks, to wash our hands, to be more patient. As time goes along, to get vaccinations so that we can be sure to protect ourselves and others. To live abiding upon God's love through Christ with the same strength driven by love brings joy in our lives, not only to survive, but to flourish. When we have this understanding of what it means to love, to care for one for another, we're strengthened. It's not just like, ho-hum, here's another day. It's an opportunity to express God's love that we've experienced to our neighbors and ourselves. Even when we get down and blue and aggravated and tired. You know, there's some people that I just don't get them. I don't get them, how they're always happy and always enjoyable and always continuing to be boundless energy. Those people just drive me bonkers. I don't know how they do it. And like a good author, you know, you always read more into a book once you understand the author's story and perspective. Once you understand what drives folks like that and what they've put up with in their life, I'm even more amazed at what they do. How do they do that? Perhaps they have something I don't have, but they have something I want. Perhaps as a person of faith, I lean in just a little bit and say, well, maybe I need to pray a little bit more. Maybe I need to have a little more quiet time in the morning. Maybe I need to just be on my knees and pray and work and care just a bit more. The way that Jesus cares and loves and cares about me, I need to offer that to other people even when I'm tired and aggravated. Oh, you know, one thing about life that I keep understanding more and more, the longer we live, the longer I realize the less of a perfect person that I am, despite being an only child. I'm learning through this. But you know, I mean, we have to adapt and we have to love and we have to change and we have to see. We have to take a step back sometimes and reevaluate our life. I mean, part of what the Methodist tradition of grace in our lives helps us understand is that our moving toward perfection is a process. It's not just 3 steps and you've done it, or you can do this in 12 easy ideas and 12 easy payments paid on a monthly plan. No, it's a process and it's lifelong. Perfection for John Wesley was something that he understood and knew. He said that he thought that there were some people who got really close to it, but he wasn't sure of who they were. At one point, it's kind of this unachievable goal and task, but yet at the same time, we begin to grow in God's love and our love. What drives us into the world, what drives our actions, what drives our movements, what drives us is what drives God's love. And when it begins to grow in our lives and when it takes root and when it finds home and house and strength, then it begins to flourish and continue to go out into the world. Oh, this abiding love, this abiding grace, this work of the cross, this work of Easter goes on and on and on without end. Verse 16 is especially, I can't think of the word. Verse 16, it's especially meaning for me this week as I read it. And I think it's in light of Methodism. And last week we appointed our pastors. Verse 16, it says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you." To go out into the world, to go forth into the world, to work in the church, to work in the world, to work in our families and our lives, to make a difference. Methodism, part of the beauty is that you always have a pastor. That's part of this appointment process. We don't go 3 or 4 months without one, or 3 or 4 years, or there's not a hiring committee. It's part of that's wonderful because, that's not what we're here to worship. Sometimes it turns into preacher worship, and that's not what faith is about. Part of what it means to be appointed is the gift that the church needs different leaders at different times. And I say that as the old guy standing up here almost for the 11th year. Maybe consistency is good for us right now. But in this appointed process that we're given sometimes in the process, the idea, the understanding is the bishop and the cabinet and prayer and work and the staff parish committees and pastors in general, they work together to bring about what's needed at the time. And then we're appointed, we're sent. Sometimes those appointments aren't exactly what we're thinking. Sometimes those appointments aren't exactly what we envision. And yet at the same time, God is already there before we ever get there. I always love one of my preacher friends. He used to say that every appointment they went to, they cried, and every appointment that they left, they cried. He said somehow there's something that changes you in the midst of it, where you begin to dread something going into it and you dread leaving it. But yet at the same time, in the midst of that, there's fruitfulness. This understanding of love grows and it takes root. It changes, and you take the good with the bad, and you take the best with the worst, and you take the tired with the energetic. And you go forth, and somehow the kingdom's revealed in that place and in the world, and it begins to branch out. So perhaps this little light of Christ that reminds us of the light of Christ in the world, may its flicker never burn out. May it always burn brighter and brighter through our lives. And remember that we don't pick the idea, we don't pick the understanding, we don't pick the situation, but it picks us and we go through it, knowing that God is there to strengthen us, and to give us all that we need, care for us in this life and in the life to come, and always let us know of that love and that deep abiding grace in the presence. All glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.